I'm not going to start with any easy questions.
What would you do if you couldn't fail?
I was vulnerable in the sense of I was just who I was.
In my journey as an entrepreneur, I really found who I am as a human.
I was much more emotionally available to everyone because I was much more balanced.
Finding the grace and the humor in the balance of it all.
Whatever happens in the gut happens in the brain, and whatever happens in the brain happens in the gut.
Do you have a specific morning routine?
I was able to sort of reset my nervous system by getting involved with the cold.
Allow ourselves to have imperfection.
Absolutely had mentors, absolutely 100% had coaches.
A wake-up call to me that I could not try to be something I'm not.
Seeing results of just isolating the breathing was having these tremendous impacts on my physiology.
Work at a gratitude practice.
What the hell am I doing? Can I really do this? Is this really worth it?
90+% of the decisions that we make today actually stem from fear.
When was I proud of myself today?
I think for me, it's really inspiring people to step out. And you don't have to step all the way out.
Then there are these other moments of magic and joy.
If we can just push into discomfort, we actually find that on the other end, there's a lot of benefit.
What's your purpose?
Nothing starts without a plan. Nothing ever goes to plan.
I think we're going to see a new realm of healing that ultimately wasn't available to us.
If we can bring a practice into our lives that helps us be more vulnerable.
So much of entrepreneurship, I truly believe, to anybody on this call is grit.
I got involved with Wim. I just love the guy. He's just a great human. When people are on the path, they shine.
We so often convert things into flaws as opposed to strengths.
We all deserve to be happy, healthy, and strong.
I'm so thrilled that this content is getting out there, that you guys are promoting bold and vulnerable message and aspirations for people, because I hope that we can all really live that every day.
Hey, this is Jessica.
And Svetlana, and you're listening to the Bold and Vulnerable podcast,
Where we aim to inspire others to live authentically through sharing the bold and vulnerable stories of peak performers across a variety of industries.
I'm so excited for you guys to listen to today's show. Today's guest speaker is Stephanie Paul. And Stephanie is a New Zealand native who works with executive sales teams and Tedx speakers to become master communicators. Her proven approach, called Powerful, Emotional, Engaging Presentations, draws upon her 29 years of rich and diverse entertainment experience. Her talents take many forms. As an actress who has worked in 10 international TV and film markets, you can find her work on IMDb. An improv, stand-up, and sketch comedian, a director, producer for live events, stage and video, a writer, and public speaker. And as a result, Stephanie's profound knowledge of the entertainment business, as well as her keen ability to deliver content with wit, wisdom, and humor, guarantee that her training sessions are inspirational, spontaneous, engaging, and fun. During her training sessions, she calls upon specific scientific techniques and entertaining exercises that deliver fast, effective new skills for anyone interested in taking their speaking skills to the next level. She also teaches speakers how to deliver concise, engaging messages and share informative stories that utilize advanced presentation skills. Stephanie is an executive producer and organizer for Tedx, Mission Viejo, and Orange County, and the current creative director and producer for Sienna Summit.
Stephanie and I met during one of my first live speeches for a group of about 70 people, I believe. And I was freaking out because some of my biggest mentors were actually in the room. So I felt this huge sense of pressure and just to nail it. And I found out that Stephanie was the only other female speaker at the event, but also, to my horror, she was like a communication expert. So I was like, shit. So I went up to her, I introduced myself, and I got really vulnerable and raw with her. And I was like, yo, I'm scared shitless. She was really gracious, and she took the time to sit down with me in a private room. And I'll never forget, she kind of looked me in the eyes. We took a deep breath, and she was like, it's 9:00 at night. Your presentation's tomorrow. I can't fucking help you. And I was like, shit. So we just kind of laughed and we had a good time, but she really calmed my nerves. And I think that the most important thing that she said was be yourself, create that emotional connection, and to use your own personal humor to get the message across. Because if I wasn't going to be myself, then not going to resonate. So it was literally one of my first speeches. And since then, I've stayed in touch with Stephanie, and she is amazing. She's from New Zealand. And, you know, even just a few months later when I was traveling to New Zealand, she kindly connected me with a bunch of her old contacts and old friends from there. And she's just been so amazing. So thanks, Stephanie, for everything that you've done. And welcome to the podcast. And thanks for giving us with your presence and your time.
I just want to say that my friends are not that old.
Oh, goodness.
But thank you for having me.
We want to dive right in. So I want to start with maybe some failures or some adversity. And you've done many things, acting, improv, speeches, all that stuff. So whatever you want to choose from your career, but maybe just telling us about maybe like the first time you can remember going through some sort of adversity, perhaps in front of a live audience, and maybe walk us through what that felt like and how you were able to bounce back, because you seem so confident and comfortable on stage.
Out of the gate, I think I was born with this certain amount of confidence that should be illegal in many cases. And I didn't know it when I was younger. I just thought that everybody was like me. I really thought that. I was like, what do you mean you can't do that? Why can't you do that? Like, you know, in recent years, I've had people say to me, you're fearless. And I'm shocked. I'm like, fearless, what does that mean? And then it takes me back to a moment in my life when I was 18. I was just about to move to Italy for the first time. I didn't speak the language. I had no idea what I was stepping into. I came home and told my parents I was leaving and going to move to Italy. I mean, I had this opportunity to work over there. And I remember the night before I left, sitting in my bedroom with one of my best friends, and I started crying. And I said to her, oh my God, I'm so terrified. And she goes, well, why are you going? Why are you going to Italy if you're so scared? And I'll never forget looking at her. Like, I stopped crying and I looked at her and I went, because I have to. So the drive for me has always been stronger than the fear. And whenever I reach something that I'm scared of or I have fear, my attitude towards it is, okay, how do we make this smaller? How do I figure out to break this down so that it's not scary to me anymore? Because all it is the unknown. So to me, fear is just something that's unknown. So adversity for me, I guess, in my life have, you know, yes, mountains to climb and things like that have been like the loss of my mother when my mother passed away. I mean, that like destroyed my world. And in some cases still I'm working through that process because that was in 2017. So pretty recent. Every time somebody said no to me, I said, I don't know about that. Let's see. and tried to climb the wall or figure out another way through the cracks. So I think I embrace adversity as a challenge, and I have a thirst for it. And life sucks, you know, it throws stuff at you. So I mean, I'm not quite sure how to pick a specific spot with that and say, this is a moment in my life that was super low and I got through it this way. But I've always sought mentors. I think when I first started my business, that was probably a big adversity for me because I walked away from the entertainment industry of having, you know, decades of experience with understanding actors and directors and writers and producers and stand-up comedians and all that kind of stuff, but knowing nothing about corporate and nothing about running a business. And I had to let go of being a solo function person and figure out who my mentors were and figure out who my leaders were and get coaches and get people that supported me and helped me to figure out how to run a business, because I had no idea anything about that, but, you know, was determined to figure it out. So that was a big adversity, I suppose, was trying to figure out how to run a business and talk to the corporate world coming from an entertainment background. So
yeah, for sure. And do you have any mentors that really kind of pushed you to the next level? Anyone that gave you any bits of advice that were like, man, okay, yeah, that's a nugget. That's a gold nugget that I'll take with me, you know, for the rest of my career.
There's been quite a few. One of my mentors, who was my first business coach, said to me, "You don't know what you don't know," which was a huge release off my shoulders. I was like, "Oh my God, that's so true." You know, how can I beat myself up over something that I didn't know? That's like so not fair. And I think, you know, there's been lots of people along the way that maybe weren't necessarily mentors, but were possible angels in my life, with gifts from the universe, that said things to me that made me go, "Oh my God, I really can do that." Like, for example, I didn't start my business because I wanted to. It wasn't a sort of a specific goal per se. I mean, I've always, everything that I've ever done, like when I was younger, I did gymnastics, and I was doing gymnastics, drama, singing, dancing, and my mother said I had to give up one of them because she couldn't afford all of them. So I said, okay, I'll give up gymnastics, but I took up coaching. So I coached gymnastics instead of did it. So I've always kind of coached or figured out the training aspect and done something around everything that I've ever done. So when I went through my divorce, I was very much in a superficial marriage and relationship with my ex-husband, and I wanted more than that. And I was, you know, living the life in Hollywood, and Hollywood's very superficial. And I kind of was like, you know what, I'm just going to walk away from this whole experience of life and move to the beach and start writing and figure it out. Like I had a bit of time and space in my life. So I moved to San Clemente, California to lick my wounds and figure it out. And I started teaching an acting class in a local theater, and one of my students happened to be a professor at Chapman University in California. And he said to me, he goes, "You know, you really need to take this into the corporate world." And I went, "That's ridiculous. What do I know about the corporate world? Like, that's not going to happen." And a local newspaper did an article about me just after that, because I was in a movie and I played the president of the United States in this film, and it was a cult, classic sci-fi comedy. And after that, my first two clients contacted me and said, "Hey, I need help." That's sort of how the business started. So
talk about people having a need for something and yearning for it and seeing it in you, and then, you know, your clients created you almost into that corporate space, right? They brought you in there because there was a need.
Being guided as well, how you just sort of like the path just sort of unfolds for you. Like, it's not like you need to know, it just kind of unfolded.
yeah, there's a there's an interesting aspect to that. One of my passwords, and I won't tell you for what, is grateful, powerful, manifester. And it was something that I always had and I always understood as a child. And I lost it when I got married. And I didn't understand how much I lost it and how important it was to me, because I just always believed. Like, as I was saying, you know, like I was born with that certain confidence. Like, I didn't understand why people didn't believe. What do you mean you can't do every, you know? So it wasn't until I went through my marriage and my husband was kind of, he squashed me. He squashed my beliefs. He squashed my beliefs in myself and my abilities to do things. And he really tried to, I don't know if he did it. I don't know if he did it intentionally. And we won't go into the psychology behind him, but, you know, eventually one day I woke up and I didn't know who I was, and I was really lost. And that strength or that power of manifestation that I always just naturally had, it didn't exist anymore. It wasn't there. It wasn't tangible. I didn't get it. And it wasn't until I did a lot of introspective work and, you know, read a lot of books, did a whole bunch of trainings and things on all kinds of stuff, that it sort of started to come back. And the famous story that I tell is the day that I met Jesus on the train in Belgium. And if you'll indulge me for a second, it's a kind of a bit of a long story, but it's when I really realized that I had that manifestation back again, and that I was here. I was back, not a different person, obviously different experiences, but I was back in myself. I had been shooting a movie in Belgium, and I wanted to go for a quick trip somewhere, and I went to Bruges and stayed at this amazing hotel, and they gave me this free 2.5-hour walking tour around the city. And at the end of the tour, we came to the center square, and in the corner there was the Cathedral of the Holy Blood, and the tour guy said, it's closed today, but you need to go there tomorrow. So the next day I decided, okay, I'll go and check it out. And I went to the Cathedral of the Holy Blood, and she had mentioned that there was the vial of Christ's blood there, and for the believers, you should go and see it and pray over it. And I'm not necessarily religious, although I was brought up in the Church of England as a Presbyterian. I believe in there's a power higher than us. I believe in spirituality, and I'm super respectful of other people's beliefs and religions. And so I went into this church, and the fascinating thing about it is it was built in the 12th century and the 16th century, and they're right on top of each other, like they're 2-story buildings, and they're completely different buildings, but they're, and I went up to the 16th century cathedral upstairs, and I saw the vial of Christ's blood, and I this woman was there, and it was very theatrical, and there was lights, and it was a bit of a show, and you had to get in line and wait one at a time and go up. And finally it was my turn, and I put my money in the donation box, and I placed my hand over the vial of Christ's blood, and I closed my eyes, and I said my 3 wishes or my prayers or whatever you want to call it. And then I left, I went downstairs, and then I wanted to check out the 12th century cathedral, which was very different. Like upstairs was ornate and gold leaf and high vaulted ceilings, and downstairs was just stone and wood and no one. I was in this cathedral 100% alone. And so I meditated for about 20 minutes, and somebody eventually came in, and I left. And the next day I had to take a train from Bruges to Brussels to London, take the London Underground, 2 stops to Liverpool Street Station, and then go out to Norwich. And it was I literally got out of Belgium the day before they had that bombing. I don't know if you recall, but on the train, I was a bit nervous about getting into London because I was going to be arriving at 5 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday. I had to make this transition, and I was like, oh my God, I'm going to have luggage, and it's going to be madness, and there's like a million people at Liverpool Street Station and Underground in London. And I asked the conductor if he could explain to me the transition between the train station and the Underground, and his accent was so thick I couldn't understand him. And so eventually I started talking to the gentleman next to me, because he said, look, I can help you. I actually know how to explain the transition. And I was like, okay, cool. So he explained it to me, and we ended up chatting all the way into London. And as we're pulling into London after 2 hours on the train, he turned to me and he said, I can actually guide you all the way to Norwich if you want, because I'm actually taking the same trains as you, and I'll help you with your luggage and things like that. And I was like, oh my God, that's super sweet of you. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. And we got off the train, and as we're getting off, I was like, oh my God, I am so sorry. How rude of me. I didn't even introduce myself. I said, my name is Stephanie. What's your name? And he said, Emmanuel. And I went, Emmanuel, isn't that like one of the archangels? And he goes, no, it's one of Christ's name from the Bible. And I was like, oh, this is hilarious. And I literally started laughing at this guy. And he looked at me like super weird. And I'm like, I'm sorry, this is just so funny to me. I have to explain to you. Yesterday, I was in the Cathedral of the Holy Blood, and I explained the whole thing. I was upstairs, blah, blah, blah. I see, when I prayed over the vial of Christ's blood, and when I meditated, one of the 3 things that I asked for both times was I asked for my guides to be sent to me to take me to my destination. And the statistical odds of meeting you on the train, sitting next to me, and you're going to exactly the same place as me, and your name essentially means Christ, is hilarious to me. So that's my manifestation story. When I knew that, I was like, okay, it's back. I got it.
I love that. I love that. You know how you say, like, you have that, you always knew, and you were like, what do you mean? Like, how do you not? I remember when I was little, I felt that power as well. And I used to think that, like, oh, this is like my secret power. Like, I can't tell like, people can't find out. Like, what if they think something's wrong with me? You know what I mean? Like, I used to think, like, this is weird.
Yeah.
Everything happens, everything that I'm like wishing and desiring for, like, am I like a witch? I used to be like, this is weird.
Mhm. Yeah, my favorite book when I was 10 years old was a book called The Girl with the Silver Eyes. And I have gray eyes, so I mean, I likened myself to her as a 10-year-old. But she could move things and pull things to her, whatever she wanted. And I don't know if that's why I was attracted to it as a 10-year-old, because I've sort of forgotten a little bit. But I read that book cover to cover so many times, it was ridiculous.
Hearing that powerful story kind of brings me into storytelling. And I know that you're working on things now and you've been helping people in the professional realm with live presentations and creating effective presentations and kind of how to craft messages and stories. So maybe we can transition into how you are able to help people with presentations and storytelling. And I know you've worked for some Tedx, Mission Viejo, I think it was that you were working for, and maybe Orange County, but I wanted to go into that.
Yeah, story is like super important, and it's because it's biological. And one of the things when I keynote that I talk about sometimes is I ask the question, and it's a theory, because I haven't read anything anywhere that you know, where there's been a study on it, but it's a theory of mine that, you know, when we're kids, because there was a study done at the age of, I think it was on 2-year-olds, that 2-year-olds, when they start telling lies, it's a part of the brain functionality and how it develops. So it's natural for 2-year-olds to start telling lies. And the more plausible and feasible the lie, the more likely they are to actually become successful adults by their creativity, believe it or not. So at some point, after reading that study, I started thinking, at some point, when do we stop telling stories? Is it because science and data and facts become like, well, if it's not science, data, and facts, then it can't be true. So stop telling the stories because they become associated with lies. It's just a theory of mine, but you know, so many times as a kid, or even when, you know, as an adult, I've heard people say to kids, stop telling stories. You know, and so at that point, there's some kind of psychological thing that if it's not scientifically based and a fact and a data point and a thesis or whatever, how can it be true? And but what we do know is that from the age of 2, we start telling stories. So we're natural storytellers, and biologically, it's how we communicate. And there's so many studies out there that show that we make our decisions emotionally. So how do you get an emotional decision to be made? Well, it's going to be the information is going to be delivered with a story. If it's just data and facts, then that's not going to create an emotion in me, right? So there's a really interesting study done by Antonio Damasio, who was a neuroscientist, and he wrote this book, which escapes me right now. And in the book, he talks about a study they did where they worked with people who had damage in the brain where emotions are formed. And they discovered that people who had damage in the brain where emotions are formed were unable to make decisions. Even the simplest decision. Now, they could talk logically about making a decision, but they couldn't actually make a simple decision. So if you look at it from that perspective, that also shows why story is so important, because if we make our decisions based on emotions and you're not driving the emotions through story, how are you going to get somebody to make a decision per se, so to speak? You'll get them to make a decision a lot faster if you tell a great story. The other thing that I've found in my studies is that all information, and this is actually talked about in, I think it's in the Emotional Intelligence book 2.0, is that all information that comes into our bodies, whether it's whatever sense it comes through, has to travel through our limbic brain, which is our emotional fight or flight brain, before it gets to our neocortex, which is where we make our logical and reasonable decisions. So if you think about it from that perspective, if you're not emotionally charged in some way, shape, or form, how are you going to make, how is this going to come into effect? If you are stimulating the limbic brain while you're giving information that's going to be that's eventually you want to be logical and reasonable out the other end with a decision, you're going to have to do that through story. So it's kind of a long-winded answer as to why story is so important, but it's biological. and it's fun, and our brains get involved in it, and you have to stimulate the brain in multiple different ways as you're telling story, which is why movies work so well and they're so effective, because they are pictures, sounds, and feelings through stories and emotions and sounds and music. And everybody knows that, if you turn the music off with a horror film, it's nowhere near as scary as when the music is playing. So, and it's biological, our reaction to that. So I work a lot with my clients on taking, even if it's just very short messaging, and creating it very specifically so that it's emotionally driven, it's story driven. It still has the data, the facts, the science, the information, whatever it is that needs to be in there. But at the end of the day, what's the ultimate goal and what do they want to achieve with their audience? And so how do we create that message? So essentially producing their message from the inside out,
So I'm curious, with your acting background, how did you mold that? How do you bring acting into that? Because I've done acting as well, like for 7 years, and that's what brought me into like what I do now. It kind of opened the doorway for me, just like getting in touch with my emotions and with myself. And a lot of it, I feel like I use as well. It's like that feeling, like everything comes from the feelings.
Mm-hmm. The wonderful thing about good actors is that they have learnt to use their emotions as tools. So our brain doesn't know the difference between real or fake. So we can essentially talk ourselves in and out of all kinds of trauma, which, like anxiety, for example, if you let anxiety run riot in your brain and put it on a hamster wheel, all manner of nasty stuff can happen. But so I like to describe it in the sense that if you think of your favorite actor or maybe even your favorite movie, and you remember all the lines from the movie, you remember certain scenes, you remember like, oh my God, how it makes you feel. Even you can reenact, that scene that makes you laugh the most or whatever. That's because good actors are acting truthfully under an imaginary circumstance. Bad actors are taking you on a bad ride and you just don't believe them because they're not actually using their emotions as tools. They're not fully connected to the imaginary circumstance. So what actors have actually proven to us through their abilities is that all of us can do that, because it's not something that you're born with, it's something that you're taught. I mean, I was heavily trained as an actor to the point where one time I had a writer from a movie say to me like, oh, I watched all the scenes and everything while we were cutting the movie and you had no artifice and I could tell that you had no training and you were obviously just a natural person that came. And I started laughing and I said, oh, you got that wrong, because I've had more training than probably the entire cast put together, and I'm an acting coach. So that, but so if you look at it from that perspective, when you know how to use your emotions as tools, you can trick the brain into being in the imaginary circumstance. Now, there's a certain suspension of that, because the brain's not necessarily like, when I'm on set, I know I'm on set. I know I'm not in, a shark attack in, in the ocean and whatever. It's all set up. But I've developed my ability to use my emotions so that I can act truthfully in that imaginary circumstance. So all of us can learn those tools. And it's interesting to me because many of my clients don't come from any acting backgrounds, yet they seem to be able to understand and utilize the tool set faster and quicker than most actors that I've trained, because actors get in their head about, oh, I need to be dramatic right now. I don't, how do I be a tree? I'm not quite sure why actors they attach so much emphasis on using the emotions as a tool set.
They get like stuck in the story, They get really, I know, I've been there, like letting go of the story after too,
Mm-hmm. And the other thing is very interesting, talking about the TED stuff that you asked before. One of the TED speakers that I spoke with, she was a very famous actress in the 70s and the 80s. And her whole TED talk was around the fact that she got very sick after doing a series of films and acting jobs where she had to be in very negative emotions. And emotions actually hold themselves in our body. And there is a book called
Emotion Code.
No, it's It's written by Candace Pert, and she has now passed away. And she was a scientist who she first discovered how emotions connect to us on a cellular level.
Yeah.
And she proved that how emotions and cells and all that kind of stuff came about. Like Molecules of Emotions is the book that I'm thinking of. So we can actually get ourselves really sick with constant spiral of negative emotions, which I'm now off on a completely different tangent. But so and the reverse is also the same. Like you can choose to have a positive emotion. Like one of the signs I have in my living room is today is a good day to have a good day. And it's there to remind me when I wake up one morning and I'm like, life sucks. I'm like, no, because today is a good day to have a good day. And it really works because I actually choose to go there. And even when I feel a little bit sucky or whatever, I'll jump on my trampoline, I'll go for a big walk down the beach, or whatever, I'll shift gears. I'll take 10 minutes out of my day just to shift gears, to shift my emotions, because I know it's a choice. It's not something that I have to wallow in. And weirdly enough, because of those easy things, we can use those emotions to tell stories. And it's like anything else, like leadership, for example. Leadership is 85% learned behavior. So is acting, so is speaking, so is presenting. It's just how much time do you want to commit to it? How important is communication and presence to you? Emotional intelligence. People who are emotionally intelligent, it's statistically proven, they are more effective and more successful than people with high IQs, because a high IQ doesn't necessarily, motivate or inspire a room to be a team.
Yeah, and it's great that you mentioned that book, Emotional Intelligence, because it reminds me to go back and look. I remember taking that quiz that they have with the book and just reading. Yes, you have it right there.
I know, because I've been using it during my my blog writing. So
yeah, what a great book. I'm definitely gonna link that in the show notes, because that's definitely an amazing book to dive
really
into.
Book too.
Never Split the Difference, Chris Voss. I haven't read that.
Oh, you got to read it. Oh my God, Negotiating as if your life depended on it. He's an ex-FBI agent. So these are the two books that I'm working with to inspire me to write my current blog. So it's Molecules of Emotions.
Okay, perfect. Cool.
Forwarded by Deepak Chopra. Awesome.
Thank you.
The Science Behind Mind Body Medicine. That sounds like an amazing book. We'll definitely.
It's super amazing. Yeah, Candace Pert, there you go at the top. That's
perfect.
Candace Pert.
If you get a chance, you should read Emotion Code. Have you heard of it?
You know what? That sounds familiar. Emotion Code. Who's it by?
I believe his name, I could be like Bradley Nelson. Let me check really quickly.
Bradley Nelson. I know that name. I think I've seen him in a podcast.
It's one of my favorite books ever. So he talks about, Bradley Nelson. It's so good. I mean, it talks about storing emotions in the body, like on a cellular level, like what you were saying, and how it just gets stuck in our organs and just totally creates all kinds of diseases and problems if it's not released. I had a big conversation about that actually with a neuroscientist. With acting, we talked about that. He was saying how like sometimes it really messes actors up.
Oh no, it's true. And I had a fantastic mentor, acting teacher in New York. I mean, he was a god. Like this guy was a god. Like I learned so much from this man, and I'll never forget. He didn't have the science per se behind what he said, but I'll never forget. He really drove this lesson home. Is like you must at the end of the scene, at the end of the performance, whatever it is, you have to disconnect from the character and disconnect from the emotion. He always drove that home. And I never, it was always something that I was like, okay, because I just remember one time being in a scene and it was a super emotional scene and I broke down in tears. And part of the reason why I got really, really heavily emotionally upset about it is because the girl that I was in the scene with was kind of a friend of mine, but I really didn't want to be friends with her anymore. So in this weird kind of a way, there was a subtext in the emotion to my personal relationship with her. And so the crying was more about like, I don't want this anymore. Like I'm releasing this. Like it was, it wasn't really about the scene. It was actually more about our relationship. And I couldn't stop crying at the end of the scene. He goes, "What's wrong with you?" And I'm like, was too embarrassed to admit that, the person I was in the scene with is somebody that I don't want to be friends with anymore. So it was like, it was just this weird thing. But I'll never forget that. And then once I found out the science behind it, it really solidified why it's important to disconnect, and how easy it is actually to disconnect and change and choose to go in another emotional direction.
Yeah, 100%.
So you mentioned jumping on a trampoline, taking a walk. What other things do you do maybe to disconnect from emotions and to choose a different course?
The interesting thing is that you're not always in a place where you can jump on a trampoline and go for a walk down the beach, right? I just happen to live at the beach, and I have a mini trampoline in my apartment, which the children love. And whenever where they're acting up, I'm like, you know what? I got a trampoline. I'm going to put you on the trampoline, and they will bounce for hours and just leave you alone. Just walking away to a different space, just shifting gears, shifting rooms, shifting energies, whatever that is. Getting down on the ground in a child pose for you yoga people out there, that can work. Just changing your breath pattern, like pranayama, going from to, just sometimes breathing 10 times in a row, super deep, will shift gears. For a lot of my clients that work with nervousness on stage, I create them a personal meditation. I do the, voice the whole thing. It's very specific and it's geared to them. I interview them. Those things can help too. If you're fortunate enough to have a coach that creates meditations for you. But there's very simple ways. And I think the most important thing is you have to believe that it's possible, regardless of what scenario you're in, regardless of who you're talking to, regardless of what the stress is, regardless of the energy that's negative or that's around you. You have to believe that by shifting gears, it's possible. Like, I'm not going to take this right now. I'm just going to do this. Thanks. Have a nice day. You have to believe it's possible. And until you believe, nothing's going to change. Nothing's going to shift.
Yeah, so true. You mentioned fear of public speaking, glossophobia. Do you have any fun tips for people and fun, I guess, ways to get around that anxiety before you're going to give a presentation or a speech? Is there anything that you recommend for how many times people should be practicing, how much they should be improvising versus memorizing, things like that? Because, when I watch TED Talks, or when I watch or listen to podcasts, typically I'll take away like maybe 10 or 20% of what the person is saying, unless I'm repetitively listening to it. And I just know that about myself. So unless I'm watching it, writing it down, and typically I'm listening to that kind of stuff in my car. So unless I'm reviewing it and really reviewing the material, or unless it really emotionally, like you mentioned, sticks with me, I'm not going to remember it. So what tips can you give for people that are maybe scared to get up on that stage or have glossophobia for presentations, or then like how can you coach them how to create content that sticks as well?
Wow, there's like so many things that you pointed out there that I can talk back to, and I love the fact that you've actually got the name of the phobia. I've got this weird, when I did stand up, I had this weird thing about phobias, and I love to talk about them. So I don't know what it is, but phobias in themselves, all the research that I've done on phobias, it's just something that is escalated unless it is approached, right? In the same vein, we go back to the beginning of our conversation where I said fear to me is just something that the drive is bigger than the fear. So I'll always walk through the fear, regardless of what it is. I mean, okay, I've jumped out of planes, I've jumped off cliffs, I've done all kinds of stuff because I'm like, okay, this is scary to me. Like, let's do it. I have a fear of the ocean. So
That's because you're from New Zealand. That's because you're from New Zealand. That's what they do in Queenstown, right?
Yeah, I guess so. But, even some of my friends in New Zealand think I'm crazy with some of the stuff that I've done. But so you also talked about that, when you watch stuff, the 10% or whatever you remembered, And you also talked about TED Talks. Now, the interesting thing, because my experience with TED stuff, and you did sort of reference it earlier and I didn't really respond, I'm sorry, is that TED is a very specific format. And when I got involved with the TED community, and I was involved with Orange Coast TEDx, and I went to Iran with TEDx in Quiche, and I coached 20 of the 28 speakers there in the format. And then with Mission Viejo, I was the executive producer for Mission Viejo and coached all the speakers for that and basically produced the entire event. So the format was instilled in me quite heavily. And it's very much a structure. They follow a structure. Traditionally with the TED stuff, they start coaching 6 months before the actual event. So the TED speakers, technically under the format, are supposed to be coached 6 months before. That means handing in their speech, like a month before, and it gets all written and all that sort of stuff. And so they are very heavily rehearsed and coached, and the humor is spattered in at the right place, and the story is told, and all that kind of stuff. But the interesting thing about that, my favorite TED Talk actually is the guy that gets up and makes fun of TED Talks, and it's a TEDx New York. And if you Google TEDx New York, nothing TED or something like that, he makes fun of the fact that I'm going to get up and say absolutely nothing, but I'm going to do it in the TED format. And he says absolutely nothing. He goes, and he does things like, I'm going to take my glasses off right now, and then I'm going to put them back on, and I'm going to sound really, really interesting. And so from that perspective, I think it's hilarious, because what he's proving is that through his form of communication, even though he's really saying nothing, he's still entertaining the audience, which means proof of the biological communication of how 93% of how we communicate is nonverbal and only 7% is words. So it doesn't matter about the words, as long as he was still engaging, he was still committed, he was still funny, he was still, but he really said nothing, but he used the TED format. So then we go to that 10% that we were talking about that you want to remember. Now, there's a neuroscientist called Carmen Simon, and she wrote a book called Impossible to Ignore, which is another book that you might want to put on your list. And she talks about the metaphorical 10% that, the audience will remember, because there's been no specific study that says we remember 7% or 15% or 10% or whatever it is. So she talks about the metaphorical 10%. And she talks about how we can actually decide what that metaphorical 10% is and repeat it in certain ways for the brain, so that our audience has that takeaway or that call to action. And something that I use with my clients is like, how do we, work that through so it's not the same 10% repeated over and over again. It's different ways that we add it in through story or verbalization or music or sound or imagery or whatever it is. But that is super, super important. And now I've gone off on such a tangent, I've forgotten what the question was.
I think you answered it. I gave you like a threefold question, but we hit on glossophobia and anxiety. We hit on TEDx and the format there. And I actually just looked up the presentation that you were talking about. If anyone, we'll link it in the show notes, but if anyone wants to go watch that TEDx New York, it was Will Steven who gave that hilarious talk, and I can't wait to watch it when we're done.
I love it. I love it. I've watched it several times.
Oh, so funny. So because I know that you did a little bit of improv in your career as well. How has that helped you? And, is that something you recommend to people that?
Oh God. Yes. I work in my workshops. I do improv exercises. I'm actually doing a conference next year, which is predominantly for the social engineering community, like hackers and things like that, corporate, hackers, people that are on the good side, not the bad side of the hacking industry. And we'll be doing some improv exercises with them. But improv is an amazing, amazing tool. And I didn't really realize how amazing of a tool it was until I really started working in the corporate world, because to me it was just a given. Like I spent 12 years studying it. And if you combine that with stand-up comedy, because I improv on stage with stand-up, and then, just in how I work with my audiences and my trainings day to day now with my business, I use improv, and it's such an amazing tool because when you get proficient at improv, I think the core perspective or the core jewel of improv is allowing you to be joyous, focused, and relaxed, and therefore vulnerable. So you're not in that space of like, oh my God, what if? You're just in that space of like, let's go. Yes, and how can I help? You know, it's just that, it's that place of yes anding, and I don't think we yes and enough. And yes and is, for those people listening who don't know anything about improv, it's basically one of the first exercises you learn in improv is how to yes and something. And instead of saying, oh no, I don't like that. No, let's, you know, and a lot of people say no when they first learn the yes and game. They go yes and then they say something that's negative, or they say something that's no, stopping it. But I think, you know, improv itself and that simple game actually taught me just to yes and the universe in general. Just like, okay, that's interesting, but how about this? Or can we discuss that? Or can we look at it this way? Or, you know, it's a phenomenal tool for starting any, I think, correspondence, or even a difficult conversation or something that could be combative, you know, way to start a conversation. When I did laughter yoga and became certified as a laughter yoga trainer and leader, there's one of the women that I met, and I'll never forget her telling me that after she got certified as a laughter yoga trainer, she would now start an argument with her husband. If she had to have a difficult conversation with her husband, she would just go home, and when he arrived, or whenever they sort of met in the room, she would just start laughing. And that was the key for him to go, oh shit, what do we have to talk about now? But because laughter is the most contagious behavior that we have, and it fires off the most mirror neurons, she kept laughing. He eventually would start laughing. And what a great place to start a difficult conversation from is where you're already yes-anding each other emotionally and neurologically wise through laughter.
Kind of going into that a little bit more in terms of how improv can help, what would you suggest for people that, like, how much improv should there be when you're trying to convey a message versus how much practice should there be? Because I know you kind of broke down how Tedx is really formatted and the humor points are like pinpointed in there. But, you know, when you're giving maybe a presentation or a speech, something that's outside of that, you know, 15-minute platform, how much improv would you suggest, you know, for people that maybe aren't good at it? I don't know.
No, that's a really good question. So I did a keynote presentation a few years ago for a bunch of CEOs, and I was specifically asked to talk about scripting and why scripting was so important. And I know the reason why I was asked to do this presentation is because the CEO that was in charge of all the CEOs, because it was a peer group organization, was having a hard time getting his CEOs to use the script that the company had chosen for them to, you know, essentially sell or pitch to their potential members. And so he asked me to do a presentation on scripting. And so I went through all the different types of scripting in the film industry, you know, and finally I came down to improv, and I said, look, you know, people think improv is this amazing, miraculous, magical thing that just kind of happens on stage, and these people come up with these, but there are rules. There are rules to improv. And if you don't know the rules and you don't know them really well, and it's just like writing, essentially you can't create an amazing improv because you're not following the rules. So improv essentially still is a script because you're following the rules, and you can't break the rules until you know how to play the rules really well, right? So the thing about improv is when you ask me to explain how much improv and how much practice, my answer to that is practice, practice, practice as much as you possibly can. And if you're going to improv, learn the rules so that when you go out there and you're going to improv, you know how to improv. with stand-up comedy, people, say, and I was fascinated by it when I first started stand-up, like these amazing headliners that could just talk to the audience, and they were so incredibly funny. And half of their show didn't even look like it was written. It was just improv straight out of the audience. And I realized after being around the industry for 12 years that it was all rehearsed and practiced. And it was all based on, they'd still improv with the audience, but, every time you improv with the audience is what we call in stand-up riffing. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. When it works, you bank that, you pocket it, and you use it for later, because there's always going to be a guy in a red shirt. There's always going to be a couple in the front row. There's always going to be a divorced person. There's, you bank on the fact that there's always going to be a certain amount of psychology in the room. And if you talk to psychologists, and every psychologist that I've spoken to, and 2 of them are my best friends, somewhere between, depending on what study you look at, there's 5 to 12 psychology personality types, which is what things like Myers-Briggs and Gallup and Strength Finder and DISC and all that kind of stuff is based around. Is, unfortunately, no matter how individualistic we like to think of ourselves, we all fall into categories psychologically and behavioral wise, because we're human beings. We're not tigers with duck feet. We just, we are human beings. If you think of it like cats, we've got spots and lines and stripes and claws, and some people have manes and whatever. But at the end of the day, we're not tigers with duck feet. So we all fall into certain categories. And ultimately, when it comes down to speaking, presentation, communication, and connection, you got to give a shit about what kind of cat you're talking to, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't care about the cats that you're talking to, they're not going to care about you. We're no longer in that age of like having the agenda and being in the right place at the right spot on stage, and this is the power position and blah blah blah, and now I'm going to talk with steeple hands. It's all bullshit. It's all bullshit. It's like Brene Brown says, the power of vulnerability is where creativity comes from. And that the moment when I met you, that was a magical moment for me. I'd never had my slide deck like shut down on me like it did that day. And I had that instant where they were like, "Oh, we'll fix it." And I'm like, "No," because I knew I had the audience. I knew everybody was connected to me, and I was not going to waste 5 minutes while they redid my slide deck and did all the technology and all that kind of stuff because I was like, and that's why I was just like, no. And I was like, no, no. And we went straight back into the audience, because the audience, you guys told me what you wanted to hear. You guys, I was still able to impart most of the messaging that I had planned, but it didn't matter that not all of it got there. It didn't matter that they didn't see my images or whatever, but you saw the effect of that. And I'm not trying to blow smoke, but I'm trying to say, because you were a receiver of something like that, is what I impart or try to impart on my clients and the people that I work with, is at the end of the day, it's about them. It's not about you. It's not about perfection. It's about community. It's about connecting. It's about vulnerability. And, UCLA did a study that was published or talked about in a Forbes article, where the top 3 attributes of human beings was transparency, sincerity, and empathy. And another one from Berkeley was humor. And those to me are the 4 things that you have to have as a presenter. The hardest thing to learn, like surfing, the hardest thing to learn is reading the wave and the right time to start paddling. And I think it's the same about being a presenter with an audience. The hardest thing to learn is how to read the audience and know the right time to shift gears and give them different content.
Yeah, and I want to paint the picture too for people that you just told that story, and that was very inspiring for me to just be in the room when there's professional speaker whose technology just completely doesn't work. Slide deck's not there. I don't even think your mic wasn't on. Like, it was just one of those things where you were like, you know what? I'm not going to lose.
I wasn't even dressed right. You guys were all in yoga gear, and I was in a goddamn evening gown.
That's true. true. Nobody told you the attire, and that was I don't know whose fault that was.
No, it was my fault because I didn't read the
attire.
email. I got an email, but no one physically told me. So I don't read all my emails that are like a million miles long. So, you know.
But you used it to your advantage, which I thought was very clever, and it was very on the spot. And it just and it's what compelled me to go up to you and say, oh my gosh, I just heard you do this. I'm talking tomorrow. Help me, you know. And I commend you for that, because it was one of those things where if you had stopped and let the tech people try to figure out the presentation or whatever, you know, 10 minutes would have gone by and everyone would have been dozing off, snoozing. And again, you know, we only remember that percentage of the message, and you got the message there. You got the message across, so it didn't matter.
And that in itself would have been allowing it to be all about me. No, I need my slides. I need this. And it was probably one of the hardest lessons I had to learn as a stand-up comedian and as an improv artist, was to allow my ego to be dropped and to walk out and let the audience tell me what they wanted, and to trust that I could provide, to trust that I had the skill or the talent that could provide, or the expertise or whatever. That was one of the hardest lessons I ever had to learn, because for a long time, I was a control freak. I did not want to let go on that. No, I must be prepared, you know. But to trust that I had enough knowledge and expertise to be able to do it, you know. So that particular moment was all that skill set combined, happening in a professional setting, in a corporate setting, and going, no, I got this. Go away. Let's talk to them.
That's where the improv comes in too, you know. And what you mentioned about scripting and how, you know, like practice until you know the rules. And that reminded me of, you know, all these like famous comedians. Like I listened to a podcast with Kevin Hart recently, and he is rehearsing for a year before he does his big show. He's practicing. So it's like what you see on stage and all that stuff, it's like, no, he's practicing. Like he's not just like, oh, I go up there. He said he's practicing like every minute of the day. Like he's honing his craft. So I think that's like, you really have to, like, it's like neurologically get it into your body too, and then you can kind of like play with it.
You hit it on the head. Like I tell my clients all the time, you must practice the way you want to present, or you're going to present the way you practice. If you practice sitting down and you practice like reading, you know, whatever it is, you know, you're going to end up presenting that way. But whenever I have a keynote or something that I have to do, or a new speech or whatever, I always write it out. I stick it on my music stand. I get up, and the moment I start rehearsing it, I'm physicalizing it. I'm running around the room. I'm moving back and forth. But because it's in big letters on my music stand, I can see it, and I can, from a distance, and I can still move, and I can be crazy, and then I can like, oh, that was funny. Something just random came out of my mouth. I'll just put that down there, you know, so I can play with it. So, and we don't speak the way we write. So many people like write their speeches and then try and stumble over it as they're speaking, but we don't speak the way we write. So, funny enough, I've been told with my blogs, my blogs are written the way I speak. So that's cool. It works for the people that know me, but maybe not the people that don't know me. I'm not sure. But my editor, every now and again, she tries to write my jokes out, because, you know, she's grammatically correcting me, and I'm like, no, that's a joke. It's not supposed to be grammatically corrected as a writing. But improv is definitely something that has to be rehearsed. Everything has to be rehearsed and practiced. For God's sakes, you know, driving a car, making a cake, you know, your favorite smoothie, your coffee in the morning, whatever it is. We don't learn stuff by osmosis, and well, occasionally we do, but you know, we're not plants. We have to practice and rehearse, and some people are tangible, and some people are audible, and some people are, you know, verbal, visual, whatever it is, but you have to physically practice it. And the more you physically practice it, the faster it's going to come.
When I went through my yoga teacher training, they had us, we were practicing a lot, obviously, in terms of movements and getting people into positions and what those words needed to be. And so some of it was scripted, but, you know, before we graduated, we had to actually type out an hour-long class. And I mean, it was like 10 pages long because the amount of words that you're saying to get people into each different position, it's so many words. And so
it's about 12,000 words, I think.
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, writing it out was so mundane, but then I ended up putting it to the music and creating the sound behind it. Then I would cue myself to where I was and what I needed to do and what transition we were going to. And it was, I mean, it's almost like a play that you're writing, you know, you're writing this whole big performance. And then when you actually do it, then, and you memorize it, then you can start the improvisation with it. And so, you know, in my journey as a yoga teacher, it's been script, and I was probably horrible when I first started, but then when I started improvising, adding my own thing, but I knew the background, the general skeleton of it, then I could kind of play around with it. So I mean, it's like you said, it's with anything, but that just kind of popped into my mind, and it's something that I didn't even know that I had done.
No,
really.
But and I want to say thank you for mentioning that, because I just want to point out something. You know, there's an expression that, you know, some people say is like, everybody in this world should be a waiter at some point in their life and serve, you know, the public. In that same vein, or in that note, too many people don't realize how much effort, energy, hours, training, practice, rehearsal goes into something seamless and magnificent. And I really want to reiterate, just for your audience, and anybody who's listening, and anybody who I share this with, is that just to become a yoga instructor is thousands of hours in itself. And you know, and I've been doing yoga for 28 years. No, what am I? Over 20 years, put it that way.
Wow.
So I'm not like amazing at it, but you know, I'm good. I've got a I realign myself. I was a dancer and a gymnast before that, so you know, and so I'm very good at realigning myself and following. And I often watch young yoga instructors who are not reconnecting the class and all that kind of stuff, and I know it's because they have, you know, they haven't trained, but it's like, when you get someone good, they're good for a reason. And I think people cut their nose off to spite their face with being cheap. And when they don't understand people like amazing yoga instructors or meditation instructors or whatever it is you're going for, because it's an extra curriculum. It's not the, you know, 9-to-5 job and corporate thing that we have to have in the world and blah blah blah, whatever that is. But it's super important to acknowledge that when people are really good at that, they'll change your lives. They will change your lives, and they'll change your lives because they are dedicated and devoted to that, and they're worth every goddamn penny that you pay them. And I think, going back to what we talked about earlier with the emotional intelligence stuff, and I really want companies and corporate people and business people to understand, you will change your businesses, you will change your careers when you understand emotional intelligence, when you understand communication and presence, and when you understand how we biologically receive and give information. Like, it's a no-brainer to me. But
preach,
you know,
it, sister.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, I don't even care whether it's not about me preaching what I do. It's just in sincerity. You know, people say, be the change you want to see, the whole Gandhi stuff and all the rest, you know, but honestly, it's like, I've worked with companies that their mission statements and their whatever you want to call it is not how they function. they have all these beautiful words like ethics and collaboration, and they do nothing. They don't function that way. They do nothing towards that. And to me, that's just like, you may as well just shut down business, because eventually you're either not going to grow or it's not going to work, because there is a sincere movement in the world towards this form of communication and presence and connection and emotional intelligence, and people are waking up to it. Through neuroscience, it's biologically, scientifically being proven. We can't negate that this is a movement. We can't negate that this is going to change the world unless, I don't know, unless some government tries to shut us down.
No, it's so true, and it resonates so deeply, because from the yoga side of it, I was probably a horrible yoga teacher when I first started, but the reason why I went into it is because I had those people, like you mentioned, that I was like, oh my God, that person literally changed my life, and I want to be that for somebody else. And so I've gotten to a point now where, I've had people reach out to me, clients that I've taught, and they're like, holy crap, you've changed my entire life. I'd have had people cry on my shoulders, and it gets so deep. And those are the moments that you do that for. And those are the moments of connection. But then you also touched on this corporate side where, businesses need to start driving that emotional intelligence into the business. And I think that starts with programs like corporate yoga and retreats and emotional gatherings and like the event that we went to, the HPX event that the select group held. I think that those are so important to dive deeper into those other sides of the business, because you can't be successful in business unless you have that emotional intelligence. So
I guess my question would be like, what's something that you can share with us that's dear to your heart, a vulnerable moment for you, something that changed your life, something that you still hold on to dearly and you can pass on as a gift to the listeners?
Okay, I did talk earlier on about my mother passing away in 2017, and one of the things that she used to say to me was, you need to learn to keep your tongue between your teeth, because one day it's going to get you in trouble. So in that vein, I think I spent most of my life trying to figure out how to keep my tongue between my teeth so that I didn't get myself in trouble. But I think, I went through this process when I was in my early 20s where I probably had more than I would have liked people come up to me, and maybe it was 3 or 4, and say to me, when I first met you, I thought you were a bitch, but now that I've got to know you, you're actually quite lovable. And at some point I got a complex about it, because I was like, I don't mean to be a bitch. That's not where I'm coming from. I'm just super direct and really like candid and can't be fucked with wasting time being, pleasant. And when I say pleasant, I want to be pleasant and all the rest of it. But at the same vein, it sort of put me into this trajectory of a very vulnerable space where I had to look deep inside myself and figure out, why did people think I was a bitch? Because I didn't feel that I was a bitch. I just felt that I was a strong and, direct person, but didn't necessarily mean to be horrible to other people. So I went on this journey, I suppose, of learning how to communicate with people in the same vein of, I never dropped the honor to myself of being direct. I just had to learn a new way to communicate. So I think the process of improv and stand-up and just being really introspective and really reflective on how I may have upset people or how I could have come across in a negative way, really helped me. And I think stand-up was super cool, because now I actually know how to deliver the message in a more humorous way, so it's not as negatively received, but still direct. But that transition was really a big vulnerability for me, I think, because in no way, shape or form did I ever think or feel like I was being a bitch. I just, as I mentioned, you know, my drive is stronger than my fear. So I'm like, my number one value in life is authenticity. And my values are listed on my website, but my number one value is authenticity. And that encompasses, you know, lies and all that kind of, I can't stomach any of that kind of stuff. So, and I've even found myself in places at times where it's super difficult, and maybe I've done something wrong, or maybe somebody's done something wrong to me. And I'm like, I don't want to deal with this and but my core value system goes back to authenticity, and I have to be ethical. It was something that my father taught me, and both my mother and my father were extraordinarily ethical. And I'm not quite sure what happened with my siblings, but you know, ethics is what is like, if it doesn't feel right, and even sometimes I'm like, I don't want to do this thing, but it's the ethical thing to do, and this person doesn't deserve me to give this back to them because they were an asshole, but it's the ethical thing to do, so I still do it. And I struggle with that, but I think at the end of the day, that's what allows me to go to sleep at night and get up in the morning and say, today is a good day to have a good day.
I resonate with that so deeply from my management time in my 20s. And just, I had the same instance where I was wrecked and I wanted to get to the top of the company. I was like very determined, leadership. And along the way, I was called bitch to multiple people and by multiple people rather. And I had to kind of take a step back, and I actually got a coach to help me with communication.
A bitch coach? You got a bitch coach?
I got a bitch coach. Yeah.
I never got a bitch coach. That's not fair. I had to figure it out on my own.
I think we all got one. I think the three of us resonate with that. The three of us were called a bitch at one point. That's why we're on this. Absolutely. That's why we're doing this podcast together.
That's what we are.
All the vulnerable bitches.
Of course. Yeah, and you know what? My bitch coach is actually coming up. She's on episode 7, so check out Lydia. She was my bitch coach, and she really got me through it. But yeah, I mean, I just thank you for sharing that, because I was in a male-dominated business, still am in a male-dominated business, and you know, having to take that feedback in and having to really adjust the way that I was communicating, even though I didn't want to. I was like, well, why should I have to change? Why? I was too immature to see that. But now, you know, looking back, I'm like, oh, you know, they were right. I needed to change the way that I was communicating. I can't be that direct, because not everyone will resonate with that. But like you mentioned, you can bring pieces of it in with the humor, and you can still be direct, but you can deliver it in a different way.
Yeah.
So I love that.
And when you learn more about your emotional intelligence, you can learn more about how to deliver yourself. You know, the more you learn about yourself, the more you can deliver yourself in a more palatable way.
Absolutely.
Like, I think we've all been there. Like, I got called a bitch too. Like, you're super, like, you know, the same thing. Literally what you were talking about, both of you guys, it was the exact same thing, that I'm just really aggressive, basically, like this aggressive bitch. And I've had people say that to me too. I really thought you were a bitch. And same thing, I had to like look inward and be like, you know, I don't think I'm a bitch.
How am I coming across?
Like, what are you talking about? I just know what I want. But I thought I was being clear.
I thought I was defining the issue. Like, what are you talking about?
Oh, God. Thanks so much for coming on. This was great.
But where can people find you? And maybe what are you working on now that you want to drive people towards?
Well, according to the people that think I'm a bitch, I live under a rock. So it's going to be difficult to find me. No, seriously. My website is stephaniepaulinc.com. And all my social media it's either Stephanie Paul E, Stephanie E Paul Inc. or Stephanie Paul Inc. or whatever. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, although my Instagram's not really business, it's kind of just me being silly. And I have Twitter. But yeah, it's just reach out and touch me. And
where are you most active?
Where am I most active? Probably LinkedIn and Facebook.
Okay, awesome. Well, we'll link everything in the show notes, but if anyone wants to touch base with you, LinkedIn or Facebook, those are the ones. You mentioned you were working on a blog as well. When is that going live? Is that live?
I have two blogs. I have two blogs already. My second blog were already written, but they're on my website, and I should probably start respinning them out over stuff. But my second blog should be up in the next week. I've just done the first draft of it. I have to go through and edit it because I'm trying to get it down. I recently, I don't know how recent February was, but I was in the Life Sciences Leader on pitching. So that was super cool. I mean, I can send you that link if you want to add it to the podcast.
Absolutely.
One thing I do want to say is if you have any listeners in Southern California, I am a board of director on the board of directors for the Alzheimer's organization, and I am producing a comedy show for a fundraiser for us on June 7th, which will be at the casino in San Clemente, and we have the capacity for 300 people. And I have one of the number one headlining comedians, Cash Levy, in the country. He's amazing. Oh my God. It was like universal. I would like send him to me. I was like, I can't believe you're available for this date. And he goes, yeah, sure, I'll do the show. And I'm like, oh my God, because he is phenomenal. And I'm going to open the show, and we're doing a wine and cheese reception, and all the money, all the proceeds goes to the Alzheimer's Association. So if anybody is in SoCal and wants to attend, I would love to have you.
That's amazing. Thank you for mentioning that. We definitely, Alzheimer's hits near and dear to my family and my heart. So I will definitely send that out to all of my contacts from when I used to live in San Diego and worked in LA area. So I'll send that out to everyone. But yeah, thank you so much, Stephanie. We loved having you on.
Hey, no, my pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Bold and Vulnerable podcast. For more information on today's speaker, please visit us at boldandvulnerablepodcast.com.
And don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Let's keep spreading the love by being bold and vulnerable. Thank you. We love you.